Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. He walked into her mother's memorial service holding another woman's hand, not discreetly, not apologetically. He walked in the way men walk into rooms they believe they own, shoulders back, chin lifted, the woman beside him wearing a dress, the color of champagne at a service where every other person in the room wore black. Maeve Holloway saw them from across the chapel and felt something go very still inside her. Not grief, not rage, something more precise than either. The recognition of a prediction fulfilling itself, on schedule in the worst possible location, exactly the way her mother had warned her it would. What Owen Holloway did not know, what no one in that room knew except Maeve and the estate attorney sitting in the third pew with a briefcase across his knees, was that the paperwork had been signed 4 days earlier. The trust had been restructured, the company had been transferred, the door had been locked, and Maeve had the only key, and Owens had spent the last 2 years positioning himself to walk through a door that no longer opened for him. He thought he was watching his wife grieve. He was watching her finish. Chapter 1. The Daughter Who Paid Attention. Her name was Maeve Holloway. Before she was Holloway, she was Maeve Sutton, and before she was Maeve Sutton, she was the daughter of Irene Sutton, who had spent 31 years building a specialty pharmaceutical distribution company out of a spare bedroom in Columbus, Ohio, and turned it into something that operated across 14 states and employed 400 people and appeared on no public ranking, because Irene Sutton did not believe in announcing what you had built until you were certain it could not be taken from you. Maeve had grown up understanding this principle before she had language to describe it. She watched her mother move through the world as though wealth were a private matter, the way faith is a private matter for people who actually have it. Irene drove a Volvo. She bought her clothes from department stores and kept them for years. She sent Maeve to public school in a suburb where no one knew the Sutton name because the Sutton name was attached to holding companies, not to people. What Irene gave her daughter, instead of visibility, was attention. Maeve learned to read rooms. She learned to distinguish between people who wanted to be near her and people who wanted to be near what she represented. By the time she was 17, she could identify the second category within 10 minutes of conversation. By 22, the skill had become so refined it was almost involuntary. She walked through rooms the way a physician walks through a waiting area, cataloging information that other people did not know they were broadcasting. She met Owen Holloway at a fundraising dinner for a children's literacy organization where she had been volunteering for 3 years. He was 35. He was charming in the manner of men who have made charm a professional tool. He sold commercial real estate. He wore good suits and knew which wines to order and asked questions that seemed interested without ever quite arriving at curiosity. Maeve watched him across 2 dinner parties and a charity auction before she agreed to dinner alone. She noticed that he always positioned himself near whoever held the most perceived status in the room. She noticed that he told stories in which he was always more competent than his colleagues. She noticed that he never asked a follow-up question to anything she said about her own work. She told her mother about him in Irene's kitchen on a Sunday morning, 3 months in. Irene listened without interrupting. When Maeve finished, her mother poured more coffee and said, "A man who asks about your job but never your opinions on it is not interested in who you are. He is interested in what you do. The first is a foundation. The second is a calculation." Maeve heard this. She held it carefully. And then she made the mistake that most people make when they receive accurate information at the wrong emotional moment. She set it aside. They married 18 months later. Irene attended the wedding with the particular composed grace of a mother who loved her daughter enough to be present for a choice she did not endorse. Chapter 2. The architecture of a marriage. Owen Holloway understood value in the way that men in his field understood it. As something external, something that could be assessed, leveraged, and converted. He had assessed Maeve correctly in several respects. She was organized. She was capable. She managed things quietly and without requiring acknowledgement. And the things she managed had a way of running so smoothly that they became invisible, which meant that Owen's life ran smoothly, and Owen received the credit for a smoothness he had contributed nothing to produce. He did not know about the Sutton Company for the first 2 years of their marriage. Maeve had not hidden it, precisely. She had simply not announced it. She worked 3 days a week as a consultant for a healthcare nonprofit. She drove a sensible car. She kept a household account that covered their shared expenses, and never ran short and never required explanation, because Owen never asked for one. When he did eventually learn about Sutton Distribution, it came through a business contact who had recognized the surname at a dinner party and mentioned it with the reverence that people in commercial real estate reserve for companies that own the buildings they try to sell. Owen came home that evening with a different quality of attention in his eyes, something that Maeve recognized immediately and chose not to name out loud. That was the 3rd year of their marriage. By the 4th year, the attention had transformed into something operational. Owen began asking questions about the company's structure, its revenue, its succession plan. He framed these questions as interest, as partnership, as the natural curiosity of a husband invested in his wife's future. Maeve answered some of them and redirected others, and watched him the way she had always watched people who wanted things from her, carefully, without letting the watching show. In the 5th year, she found the emails. Chapter 3. What she found. She was not looking. She had never been a woman who looked through her husband's phone. The instinct had never arrived because it had never been necessary. And then one Tuesday evening, Owen left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he showered. And Maeve walked past it to get water. And the screen was lit with a message from a name she didn't recognize. And the first line of the message was visible without clicking anything. And the first line was enough. She stood in her kitchen, holding a glass of water, and read the first line 3 times. Then she put the glass down. She did not touch the laptop. She walked to the living room and sat in the chair by the window and spent the next 4 minutes doing something she had learned from her mother, taking inventory of what she actually knew versus what she was inferring. What she knew: there was a woman named Cressida. There was a message. There was a first line. What she inferred: the rest. She went to bed before Owen finished his shower. She lay in the dark and breathed and let the information settle into the places where it needed to go. She did not cry. She had inherited from her mother the particular discipline of women who understand that emotional responses, however valid, have optimal timing, and this was not it. The next morning, she called a private investigator, not because she needed proof for herself. She had already done the math. She called because her mother's attorney, a man named Benedict Shaw, who had handled Sutton family legal matters for 22 years, had told her once, years ago, in a conversation she had not known she was storing: in any action involving asset protection, documentation is not paranoia, it is preparation. She had the documentation within 6 weeks. Cressida Vane was 31. She worked in commercial development, which was how she and Owen had met, which meant the affair had been running longer than the emails suggested, and had been conducted, with some efficiency, directly adjacent to Owen's professional life. There were hotel receipts, timestamps, a pattern of weekend conference trips that had not involved any conferences. There was also something else, something Benedict Shaw identified during a review of joint financial records that Maeve had not asked for, but that he had conducted anyway. Because Benedict Shaw had known Irene Sutton for 22 years and had understood, without being told, that this call was not a routine legal check. Owen had consulted a divorce attorney. 9 months ago, he had done this under his office address, using a personal credit card that did not appear in their shared accounts. He had met with the attorney twice. Benedict had obtained the appointment logs through channels Maeve did not ask him to specify. Owen had been planning before Maeve had found anything. He had been positioning while she was still, in his estimation, unaware. He had been moving pieces across a board he believed was his. He did not know whose board it actually was. Chapter 4. The last year Irene Sutton was diagnosed in February. Pancreatic cancer, the same disease that moves like a tide and does not negotiate. She had 4 months, maybe 5. She used them with the precision of a woman who had spent 3 decades building things that were meant to outlast her. She met with Benedict Shaw 8 times in those 4 months. She restructured the Sutton Distribution Trust. Assets that had sat in vehicles adjacent to Maeve's marriage were migrated into structures requiring Maeve's sole signature. Her name alone, her authorization only. The company's succession documentation was reviewed, updated, and executed. A shareholder agreement that had been in draft for 2 years was finalized and signed. Irene also did something she had never done before. She shared with Maeve the complete picture of what the Sutton estate contained. Not as a disclosure, not as a transaction, but as a conversation between a mother and daughter who both knew they were running out of Sunday mornings in the kitchen. "It is worth approximately $240 million, Irene said, including the company, the properties, and the portfolio. It will be yours entirely. Owen has no claim to any of it. Benedict has made certain of that. None of it was ever marital property. None of it was ever in a joint vehicle. He has been sitting next to a fortune for 5 years, and his name appears on none of it. Maeve looked at her mother across the kitchen table. The chipped mug, the morning light. He's been talking to a divorce lawyer, Maeve said. I know, Benedict told me. Irene's expression did not change. Let him. He is going to walk into that room, believing he has leverage. I want you to understand before I am gone that he has none. Not $1. Not one share. Not 1 square foot. Benedict will be beside you, and everything will already be in place, and all you will have to do is sit down at that table and let him find out who he married. Maeve reached across the table and covered her mother's hand with hers. He is going to come to the service, Maeve said. He might bring her. Irene was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Let him come. Let him bring whoever he brings. Men like Owen always believe the funeral is the moment of maximum weakness. Let him believe that. The door will already be locked before he arrives. Irene Sutton died on a Thursday morning in April. Maeve was beside her. She held her mother's hand and watched the monitors, and felt the particular quality of silence that enters a room when the person who has been its center is no longer present. Then she stood. She straightened her jacket. She walked into the hallway where Benedict Shaw was waiting with his briefcase and his measured, professional readiness. Everything is executed, he said. Everything is in place. Maeve nodded. She looked back through the doorway at the room. He will come to the service, she said. I know. Let him. Chapter 5. The memorial service was held on a Saturday in May, a warm afternoon that felt wrong for grief, the kind of spring day that insists on being beautiful regardless of what is happening to the people standing in it. 230 people attended, former colleagues, longtime clients, board members, neighbors from the Columbus House, people who had known Irene Sutton as a woman of quiet consequence and had understood, without requiring it to be explained, that quiet consequence was the rarest kind. Maeve stood near the entrance, receiving people with a composure that those who knew her recognized as the real thing rather than performance. Her eyes were dry. Her posture was what it always was. She wore a black dress and the watch her mother had given her on her 30th birthday. A simple thing, no brand visible on the face, engraved on the back with 2 words. Pay attention. Owen arrived 45 minutes into the service. He was not alone. Cressida Vane walked in beside him. She was wearing a dress the color of pale sand. Not black, not gray. The color of a woman who had either not thought carefully about the occasion or had thought about it and made a choice. Her hand was in Owen's. She walked into the memorial service of Maeve's mother as though the entrance were a statement. The room noticed. The particular ripple of collective awareness moved through the mourners. Conversations paused. People turned. An older woman near the back who had worked with Irene for 15 years looked at Cressida's hand in Owen's, and then looked at Maeve, and her face performed a rapid series of emotions that arrived and were quickly controlled. Maeve saw them enter. She watched Owen navigate the space between the door and where she was standing, his expression calibrated to sympathy, carrying beneath it something else, a quality of assessment, a man scanning a property he believes he is about to make an offer on. He stopped in front of her. He did not release Cressida's hand. Maeve, I'm so sorry about your mother. Maeve looked at him. She looked at Cressida. She looked at their joined hands. She looked back at Owen, and what she felt in that moment was not the thing he expected her to feel. There was no collapse, no flood, no visible fissure in the composure he had come here, hoping to witness. What she felt was clarity, the clean architectural clarity of a woman watching a prediction arrive exactly on schedule. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice was level, professional, the voice of someone completing a task on a list. She turned to the next person waiting to offer condolences. She did not look at Owen again for the remainder of the service. Owen interpreted this as paralysis. He interpreted the composure as the numbness of a woman who had not yet understood her situation. He interpreted the absence of a scene as confirmation that Maeve was, as she had always been in his estimation, too quiet to fight, too contained to resist, too small, finally, to stand in the way of whatever came next. He had been making this error for 5 years. He made it one final time, standing in the chapel where his wife's mother lay, and he did not know that it was the last calculation of his life as he had built it. Chapter 6. The weeks between Owen moved out 11 days after the memorial. He did not discuss this with Maeve. He simply began leaving things at Cressida's apartment, a gradual migration of suits and toiletries, and the particular domestic infrastructure of a man who had decided the logistics of departure were her problem to manage. When Maeve, Texted to ask where he was, he replied, "I think we've both known this was coming." His divorce attorney filed the initial paperwork the following Monday. The filing listed, under assets subject to equitable division, the family residence at 2240 Garrison Drive, joint investment accounts, and any inheritance or business interests received by either spouse during the marriage. He said the last part with the confidence of a man who believed he was listing the prize. Any business interests. He believed Sutton Distribution was there, waiting to be divided. He believed $240 million was sitting in a vehicle that had his name adjacent to it, and that the paperwork would simply confirm what proximity had always promised him. He did not know that Benedict Shaw had already filed a response brief. While Owen was meeting with his attorney and revising his asset estimates upward, Maeve was sitting at the kitchen table of the house Owen believed was jointly owned, drinking coffee, and reading Benedict's updates on her encrypted phone. She watched him move money. He transferred $44,000 from their joint savings into a personal account the week after he filed, without her knowledge or consent, after his attorney had already been engaged, which meant the transfer was not an accident. It was a decision made by a man who was, in the estimation of the court, dissipating marital assets with documented intent. Benedict called on a Thursday evening. His voice carried the particular tone of an attorney who has everything he needs and is now choosing his words carefully out of professional habit rather than necessity. He moved the money. How much? $44,000. Personal checking. Day before yesterday. Maeve set down her coffee. That is exactly what my mother said he would do. Your mother understood him very well. Is it enough? Combined with the divorce attorney consultations he failed to disclose, the hidden credit accounts, and the pattern of financial behavior we have on record since last year, he has given us everything we need to walk into that room from a position of complete strength. His attorney will spend most of the meeting trying to manage the exposure, rather than advancing any claims. Schedule the meeting, Maeve said. Chapter 7. The conference room, the offices of Shaw and Carmichael, occupied the 12th floor of a building in downtown Columbus that had, as it happened, been developed by a Sutton subsidiary in 2009. Benedict had never mentioned this to Owen. Some facts were better delivered in conference rooms. Owen arrived first. He wore a charcoal suit that Maeve had helped him select 3 years ago for a business presentation he had wanted to impress people at. His attorney was a man named Gilbert Price, who handled high-asset divorce cases and had a reputation for aggressive positioning, and who had, until approximately 40 minutes into this meeting, believed that aggression was what the situation called for. Maeve arrived at 9:20. Black blazer, white blouse, the watch on her wrist. Nothing else. She looked exactly as she had always looked to Owen, contained, manageable, a woman who moved through rooms without disturbing them. Benedict Shaw walked in behind her. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of attorney whose authority is expressed entirely through stillness. He placed his briefcase on the table. He sat down. He did not begin speaking immediately, and the silence before he spoke had a quality that Gilbert Price later described to a colleague as structural. Owen leaned back in his chair. He looked at Maeve across the table and allowed himself a brief, private performance of confidence. He had been in enough negotiations to know when he held the stronger position. He believed he held it now. Gilbert Price opened with precision and efficiency. He outlined Owen's position. The marriage had broken down. His client sought equitable division of marital assets, including the family home, the joint investment accounts, and any business interests or inheritance accumulated during the course of the marriage. He gave particular emphasis to the final clause. He said it the way attorneys say things they believe are the main event. Benedict Shaw listened without expression. When Gilbert finished, Benedict opened his briefcase and removed a folder. He placed it on the table. He opened it. Before we discuss division, he said, I need to establish several factual matters regarding the actual asset structure of this marriage. The family home at 2240 Garrison Drive. Mr. Holloway's filing describes this property as jointly held marital real estate. It is not. The property is titled to the Sutton Family Trust, established in 2003, 12 years before the marriage. Mr. Holloway's name does not appear on the title, the mortgage, or any associated documentation. He has been a residential occupant of that property. He has not been an owner. The room was quiet. Owen's expression remained steady for 4 seconds. Then something shifted behind it. The joint savings account. On May 9th, Mr. Holloway transferred $44,000 from the joint savings account into a personal checking account without Mrs. Holloway's knowledge or consent. This transfer occurred 6 days after Mr. Holloway had already retained divorce counsel, establishing documented premeditation. Under Ohio law, this constitutes dissipation of marital assets, and the date of attorney retention, and the sequential relationship between those events fully documented. Gilbert Price set down his pen. The personal investment account Mr. Holloway opened under a business address. The account predates his filing but postdates the date on which his private investigator confirmed his consultations with your office. Mr. Price. We have the appointment logs. Gilbert Price looked at his client. His expression had the quality of a man recalculating a journey that has arrived somewhere he did not expect. Benedict paused. He turned a page. Now, regarding Sutton distribution, he placed a second document in the center of the table. A single page. Owen looked at it from across the mahogany surface and felt, for the first time in this meeting, something adjacent to uncertainty. Mr. Holloway's filing references business interests accumulated during the marriage as a category of divisible asset. I want to address this directly. Sutton Distribution and the associated Sutton Family Trust, holding commercial properties across 7 states, a logistics portfolio, and equity interests in 2 operating subsidiaries, is valued at approximately $240 million. The trust was established in 2003. Its assets have never been commingled with marital funds at any point during the marriage. Under Ohio law, trust assets established prior to marriage and maintained without commingling are not subject to equitable distribution in divorce proceedings. Benedict let the number sit in the room for a moment. There is no portion of this estate, he continued, to which Mr. Holloway has any legal claim, not under Ohio statute, not under the terms of the trust, and not under any equitable argument his counsel might advance, because the documentation is unambiguous and has been maintained without error since 2003. The silence that followed was the silence of a room in which everyone except one person had already known the outcome. Owen stared at the document, his mouth opened slightly. He closed it. He looked at the number. He looked at Maeve. She was sitting with her hands folded on the table, her posture unchanged from the moment she had entered the room. The watch on her wrist caught the light from the windows. 240, he said. His voice had lost its register. He stopped. He swallowed. 240 million. Maeve looked at him. She did not speak. Benedict continued. Furthermore, given the documented pattern of financial misconduct, including the unauthorized transfer, the undisclosed legal consultations, the concealed account, Mrs. Holloway's legal team will be filing a counterclaim for full recovery of dissipated assets, plus applicable damages. Mr. Holloway's exposure at this stage is conservatively estimated at $90,000. Gilbert Price set his notepad face down on the table. He turned to Owen. The particular exhaustion on his face was the exhaustion of an attorney who has been misled by a client about every fact that mattered. Dominic, we need to speak privately. Owen did not move. He was looking at Maeve. His eyes moved across her face with the searching quality of a man trying to locate something he had believed was there, some sign of the woman he thought he knew. The one who managed quietly and never pushed back and had always, in his estimation, been easier to handle than to see. He found nothing. Her expression was composed. Her hands were still. The watch said what it always said. You knew, he said. His voice was barely conversational, the whole time. You knew all of it. Maeve looked at him for a long moment. I knew about Cressida, she said. I knew about the attorney. I knew about the transfer. I knew about the account under your office address. I knew about every hotel and every conference that wasn't a conference. She paused. My mother knew before I did. She spent the last year of her life building something you could not reach. She did it from a hospital room and from a kitchen table and from phone calls with Benedict, while she was tired in a way I cannot describe, because she wanted to make sure that when you finally showed me who you were, there would be nothing left for you to take. Owen's hands were flat on the table. You brought Cressida to her memorial, Owen. You held her hand in front of my mother's casket. You stood in that room and looked at me and thought you were watching me fall apart. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked down at him with the expression of a woman who has stopped performing smallness and is no longer going to resume. You were watching me close the door. She walked to the exit. Benedict gathered the documents with efficient calm and followed. At the threshold, Maeve paused. She did not turn. The house will be formally vacated by Friday. Your belongings will be packed and available for collection. The joint accounts are frozen pending resolution of the dissipation claim. Benedict's office will handle all further communication. She opened the door. She did not say goodbye. Chapter 8. What came apart in Holloway's life disassembled with the patient, mechanical inevitability of a structure whose load-bearing element has been removed. The house was the first thing. Formal notice arrived from Shaw and Carmichael within a week. The property at 2240 Garrison Drive was trust-owned. Owen's occupancy had been residential, not proprietary, and it had ended with the filing. His belongings were packed into 17 boxes by a company that billed the service to his personal account and delivered everything to Cressida's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. Cressida's apartment was a one-bedroom in the short north that she had furnished for a single life and had not reconfigured for two. 17 boxes, and the man they contained occupied more space than the apartment was designed to hold. His employer followed 2 weeks later. A routine compliance review, triggered by the divorce filing, required disclosure of pending legal actions. The dissipation counterclaim appeared in the disclosure. His managing partner called him into a meeting that lasted less time than Owen had spent choosing his suit that morning. He walked out with his access badge surrendered and a letter describing his status as on leave pending review. The joint accounts were frozen. The personal account held less than he had expected, because he had been spending against a lifestyle he had believed was supported by a foundation that had, as it turned out, belonged to someone else. Cressida had been drawn to Owen's version of himself, the confident man in the good suits, with the professional trajectory, and the home he described, with the possessive certainty of someone who had built it, without the house, without the income, without the reputation that Maeve's invisible competence had quietly underwritten. For 5 years, what remained was a man in his mid-40s sitting in the corner of a small apartment with 17 boxes and a legal exposure that widened slightly with each week that passed. She told him on a Wednesday. She was calm about it. She said she thought they were in different places, and she wished him well, and she would need the apartment back by the first of the month. He sat in his car in her parking garage for a long time that evening. He had no house, he had no position, he had no wife, and no account he could freely access, and no professional identity he could trade on. Because all of it, every surface his life had rested on, had been maintained by a woman he had spent 5 years failing to see. He had mistaken her stillness for passivity. He had mistaken her patience for the absence of options. He had mistaken her silence for a space he could fill with whatever he wanted. He had been wrong about all of it, and the wrongness was not a single mistake. It was a worldview. It was the entire operating assumption of his life applied to a woman who had been, the whole time, operating on a different level than he was capable of perceiving. Chapter 9. The appointment 7 months after the divorce was finalized, Maeve Sutton took her place on the board of Sutton Distribution as its majority shareholder and chair. She expanded the company's partnership with a national workforce training initiative and committed $8 million over 3 years to a program placing women returning to work after caregiving into logistics management roles. She called the program Irene. She hired a communications director. She gave her first public interview to a Columbus business journal, a conversation about quiet leadership and long-term thinking, and what it means to build something that outlasts the moment. The interviewer asked about her years of maintaining a low profile. Maeve said, "My mother taught me that the most powerful position in any room is the one no one has thought to look at." The interview ran in October. A national outlet picked it up in November. A photograph from a foundation event, Maeve at a podium in a gray suit, the watch on her wrist, her expression carrying the particular authority of someone who no longer requires the room's permission, ran in a business magazine and was reproduced on a digital display outside a building in downtown Columbus that Owen had spent 2 years trying to place a commercial tenant in. He saw it on a Tuesday. He was coming from a job interview at a regional firm, offering him a mid-level position at a salary considerably below what he had been earning. He looked up at the intersection and saw her face, large and clear and entirely without performance. The expression she was wearing was not one he recognized from their marriage. It was the expression of a woman who had stopped managing her visibility. He stood there for a moment, on the sidewalk, with the city moving around him. He thought about the woman he had married, the one who packed lunches and handled insurance renewals and organized the social calendar and managed everything so quietly that the management itself had become invisible. the one he had taken to memorial services and legal offices in his mind as a problem to be resolved rather than a person to be answered to. The one whose mother he had disrespected at the memorial because he believed the mother's money was going to pass into a structure he could access, and the daughter was too contained to stop it. The photograph was still there when the walk signal changed. He crossed the street and it fell behind him. He walked toward his interview at a firm that would offer him a title 2 levels below the one he had left. And he would accept it, because the infrastructure that had made his previous life run had belonged to someone else, and that someone else had stopped. Chapter 10. Sunday, October. On an October Sunday, 8 months after the divorce, Maeve sat on the porch of a property her mother had owned since 1991, a farmhouse outside Granville, Ohio, surrounded by the particular silence of land that has been taken care of for a long time. The trees were in full color. The light came in at the angle that October produces in Ohio, long and gold and a little regretful. She held coffee in both hands, the watch on her wrist, her phone on the table beside her. She opened the encrypted folder she had maintained for almost 2 years. Every record, every timestamp, every document that Benedict and the private investigator had assembled with the patience of people who understood that preparation was the real currency of every outcome that looks, from the outside, like luck. She read through it once, slowly, the way you read something when you want to confirm that it no longer has weight. Then she selected the folder. She deleted it. The phone asked her to confirm. She confirmed. She put the phone down and picked up the coffee and looked at the trees. She did not delete it because she had forgiven Owen. Forgiveness was beside the point. She deleted it because the folder had done its work, fully and without remainder. And carrying it further would mean carrying him further. And she was done carrying people who did not deserve the effort. She thought about her mother. She thought about what Irene had built. Not just the company, not just the trust, not just the legal architecture that had protected everything when protection was required, but the habit of mind that had built all of it. The understanding that silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of a person who is not yet ready to announce what they know. The women who manage everything and are thanked for nothing are not invisible because they lack significance. They are invisible because the people around them have decided that quiet means small. That still means passive. That a woman who does not demand to be seen is a woman who can be used without consequence. Owen had made that decision. Cressida had made it. The colleagues and clients who had shaken Owen's hand and credited him with a life he had not built had made it too, without knowing they were making it, because it was easier to credit the man speaking than to look for the woman managing. Maeve put down the coffee. She stood. She walked inside. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the October land and felt the specific quality of freedom that belongs to a woman who has stopped being what other people assumed she was and is now, simply, what she has always been. Not angry. Anger had done its work and been set down. Not grieving. Grief came in its own schedule, and she allowed it when it arrived. Not defined by any of it. The marriage, the betrayal, the legal proceedings, the photograph on the downtown billboard. None of it was her story. They were chapters in a story whose through line was something older and quieter and more durable than any of them. Her mother had known this. Her mother had tried to tell her, in the way that mothers who are running out of time tell their daughters the important things. Not as pronouncements, but as kitchen table conversations over coffee in the morning, on ordinary days, before either of them knew how few were left. Pay attention. She had paid attention to everything. She had paid attention long enough that when the moment came to stop paying and to simply be, she knew exactly what she was. She was not the sum of what Owen had believed about her. She was not the quiet woman he had counted on remaining quiet. She was the daughter of a woman who had built $240 million in a spare bedroom and taught her daughter that the real inheritance was never the money. It was knowing when to wait, and knowing when you were finished waiting, and knowing, when the moment finally arrived, that you did not need to announce it. The trees moved in the October wind outside the window. The light held. She was finished.